Hi, everyone. It's Margaret Manning here with lifeafterdeath.com. We are a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death, reincarnation, and spirituality at its broadest definition. And we interview guests and have a conversation in an open-hearted and open-minded way. And I'm so excited today to have my guest, Ken Ross. Now, Ken is the son of Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and he manages the relationship with the publishers of all her books and her research papers, and he's developing, he has the EKR Foundation and is developing branches all around the world, and just carrying on the great work of his mother. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon.
It's whatever. We're timeless here. No, it's great to talk with you. As you know, we've had conversations, and I had the great honor of meeting and working with your mother for 2 years back in the early 80s. So I'm thrilled to meet you and to ask you some questions that our community is interested about.
My pleasure.
So here we go now. Your mother, of course, was known to many people as the Death and Dying Lady. That was her book that she wrote, which was so famous. And, I think you and I would say she was the life and living lady. She was such a positive person. Tell us how you think her legacy is living on.
Well, I see it. I travel around the world giving lectures, and everywhere I go, people have met my mother, and it's just amazing because, I'm in Croatia, and the person standing next to me starts talking about my mother, or I'm on a plane somewhere in Africa, and the person next to me is reading her book. So it's amazing how her legacy just continues on. Really
well, she's a remarkable woman. I mean, she was a psychiatrist, a humanitarian. She was a hospice pioneer. And, as I said, this book on death and dying, which was published in, I think about
1969.
So how many years? 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm assuming that you've got a big celebration or some kind of an anniversary going on around that.
Yes, exactly. We're going to redo the book. We're talking about the covers now, and we're going to be publishing it with her testimony that she gave in front of Congress back in 1972, trying to start hospice in this country. Back then, it was quite a challenge, and they really, had a hard time discussing it.
Well, I think that's the one thing that she really is known for, in my mind, is bringing the conversation to the public. Could you give us some of the highlights of what she did? I mean, you just mentioned, I didn't know about this presentation in front of Congress. I mean, can you talk a little bit about some of the ways that this conversation was brought to life by her?
Well, back in 1965, she had a couple of students ask her, what's the greatest crisis in human experience? And so they talked about it, and she said, surely it must be death. So she said, why don't I give a workshop on death next week, a little seminar? And so she went around to her hospital, and in a 600-bed hospital, she was told there was not a single dying person. So she thought, wow, this must be the most amazing hospital in all the world. So she went to her friends' hospitals, and same thing, not a dying person was to be found. So then she went back to her hospital without permission, which is the way she liked to operate. She went around from bed to bed and found out there's many dying people, and they were typically put at the very end of the hallway because no one wanted to face it or deal with it. And so she began talking to these people, and the staff was furious. How dare you do this? And it got so bad that doctors were literally spitting on her in the hallways, sending her nasty notes, people telling her she was a vulture, how dare she? She was threatened with being, fired. And it was quite a hard thing back in the 60s to, talk to these dying people.
That is so hard to hear that, isn't it? When you think about today, how the conversation is so wide open, how there are so many people that are able to navigate this conversation beautifully, and your mother had to go through that. That's the pioneer. I know from meeting her that she had a heart of gold, but she was tough cookie.
She was always ostracized. I mean, people think, she was famous and had a great life, but if you can imagine, she sacrificed a lot of her career. She was fired eventually, and she was blasted in the press, and she somewhat lost her family because she was never home, and so she got divorced. Her house was burnt down twice, and she had a very tough time. She really sacrificed so much of her life just to help dying patients, and yet she's still kind of attacked for it, which I just find very odd.
Well, I think that she actually said to me once, and this is a quote that I repeat this 1,000 times a day, it seems like, to my family and my sons. She says, people often criticize in you the things that they fear most in themselves. That was my Elisabeth Kübler-Ross quote that has stayed with me forever. And I think that's exactly what you've just described, that people fear death. So anyone that talks about it or brings it into the light, you criticize, you attack.
Right. It's like that Chinese proverb, the nail that sticks out gets hammered.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was my mother. She was just constantly getting hammered just for trying to help dying people. I just found it so odd. But it still continues today. I just see articles criticizing my mother, and I'm like, no, that's not what she said, because they kind of go by what the press describes as her theories, which is generally not quite true.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. I mean, most people are familiar, and we will quote the 5 stages of dying, or the 5 stages of understanding your death as you approach it. And most people will agree, I think, that at least there's some truth in that. So maybe we could just start there for those people that are watching who don't know what your mother tried to explain in order to, I guess, be more accepted and to be able to be heard. Tell us what she said.
Well, I'm going to tell you my theory, and some people won't agree with it, but my theory is that when my mother talked about the 5 stages, she was really talking about a simplified version that she could talk to the everyday person, like somebody dying in that bed.
Yes.
So, but, she'd say, no, there's not 5 stages. These are like the 5 main stages, right? Because if you're talking to someone in a bed who's dying, who's, not in the medical industry, you can't start talking about, partial denial and pseudo-denial and these different, psychological terms. So she broke it down and had a simpler version, which is the version that people always talk about. But my mother herself, I've seen her talk about maybe 13, 14 different stages. So the 5 stages is really just the framework. And people get so hung up saying, no, there's not 5 stages. There's 6, 7, 8, 13. But if you look in the book, and I just happen to have a copy here, and I don't know if you want to put a graph on later, but if you take a look, let's see, here in the book, there's clearly 10 stages, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's here in the book. So,
but she was she was so interested though in making it simple, wasn't she? She was so
that's why it's so successful, because people remember 5 stages. People are not going to remember 13 stages or complicated calculus models or things like that. But the 5 stages is just a way to begin the conversation. If you don't like it, that's great. She said, you don't have to like it or agree with it. This is just a model to begin the conversation. Even by 1974, she stopped talking about the stages. Like, you'd never hear her talk about the stages in lectures, and yet people just harp on that as if her only legacy.
But when you look at them, I mean, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, those are the 5 that people say. There actually is so much truth to that. I mean, as you said, there's subtleties around them. But to be honest with you, those are probably the most basic of all the variations. And there's so much wonderful truth in those. Because I remember she always wanted to talk to the patients and the family and hopefully the doctors. But she always wanted it to be approachable and to be reaching the heart, not the mind. Exactly.
So, and now they've taken the stages and they've made them into business models. It's called Kübler-Ross change curve. And, we're seeing them in plays, movies, TV shows. Is everywhere you look is the 5 stages. It's incredible. And yet there's some people who really hate the 5 stages. They're really like...
Well, also, they're not sequential. They're not meant to be like one follows the other in order. Like, you can jump around all over the place. And I actually personally have found them very useful in lots of different loss situations, where you're dealing with a loss of some kind, divorce or losing your job. I mean, all these things you can apply.
Right.
Anyway.
And it shows that in the book. She says you can be in 2 or 3 stages at the same time. You may skip stages, but people say, oh, no, Dr. Ross said they're linear. Or some people say, well, later in life, she admitted it wasn't linear. I'm like, no, she didn't. She said it back in 69, but people love to get hung up on that.
So we're talking about the book on death and dying, which is the one that is having its anniversary this year. But she wrote other books as well. And like you said, we were talking earlier, there's some crazy number of publishers that are publishing her work. Is it 80-some publishers around the world?
86 last time I counted. And her first book on death and dying is still in 27 languages after half a century.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And we're developing them in new languages now, in India and Mongolian. We're talking about an Arabic edition.
That's amazing. So Ken, tell me about the foundation, the EKR Foundation.
Well, I started after my mom died. 2 days after my mom died, a woman showed up from India, and she said she'd flown all the way from India just to meet with my mother. And I was like, I'm so sorry, you just missed her. So I thought I'd bring her over to the room where my mother died. And she sat on the bed. I let her touch my mother's clothing. We had to talk about my mother. I gave her some tapes and books and discussed some of my mother's principles. And she said, I think I'm going to go back to India and still start this hospice. I'm still so inspired by your mother. And I thought I should really start a foundation.
Yes.
And, maybe the foundation will help continue her work, and then I can get back to my life. But that's not how foundations work. And so slowly over the years, it's grown, and I've had, I've been trying to find the right kind of balance of a board to help me, because I'm not experienced in these matters. But now, after 14 years, I really think it's picking up steam, and we're starting up new groups in South America. And we've had a lot of interesting things happen lately with the foundation. So I'm very excited.
That's great. Now, the website is it EKR?
EKRfoundation.org.
Okay, I will put that up on the screen, because I suggest people go out there, because it sounds like there's a lot going on that's going to free you up. I think you mentioned that the Stanford University is now taking on the responsibility for all the they're archiving all of your mother's materials.
Right,
and
they're going to be devoting a full-time person just to kind of digging through the material and picking out things to be shared with the public.
No, that's great. And then you'll be able to do other. Yeah, sorry.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, we're very excited. They're going to be doing 2 new books and a documentary and full-day grand round lectures on December 2nd this year. So it's a very exciting time for us.
Wow. Well, look, I'm so thrilled to meet you, and I'm so happy that we had a chance to talk about your mother from the person one of the people that knows her best. And I think that there's a lot of mythology around people who make an impact, and she definitely made an impact on the world. Where does it go from here, Ken, for you?
Well, we're looking to start new groups. We're talking about groups in Peru and Guatemala and Spain next. And I'm trying to get all our Latin American groups to come together and form an association. And I just came back from Mexico, giving some presentations, going to Mexico again in a few weeks. We're looking to maybe begin hospice in Mexico.
That's great.
We're starting the first pediatric hospice in the country of Chile. We're going to be starting the first pediatric hospice in the country of Colombia. And we're talking about starting one in Peru, and a lot of plans going on. Very busy time for the foundation and for my mom's legacy. So I'm very excited to see this happen.
Well, thank you for carrying it on. I know it's a lot of work, but you are appreciated. And I hope that people finally one day will see the truth of what she was trying to say and benefit. Now, you're in the States, of course. You are in Arizona. I mean, you've got plenty of coverage in the United States. So if you're interested in the work of the EKR Foundation and Elisabeth's work, please check out the website. And also, I think this is a good opportunity to pick up that book and read it properly. And
yes, we'll read it.
Well, I know the woman that was behind it, and thank you, Ken, for all you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our Life After Death YouTube channel and visit our website at lifeafterdeath.com. We are a community of people who are fascinated by the topic of life after death and subjects like near-death experience, the afterlife, reincarnation, and spirituality. Together, we are exploring and discovering these topics together with curiosity and an open heart.